Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to Professor Harari. He's finally been publisher. Just before this event, the publishers of the Manjul Publishers have gone into Arabic. They've published him in Tamil and Hindi. So the last I was looking at, I think it's not 40 languages, but maybe many more than that. Sapiens and the other books, I think. So it's something which is a very interesting format, where we have a historian who's crunched about 2.4 million years into 400 pages. Of course, most of it is 150,000 years where the human being discovered Earth, grew up, and the most part of it, 75,000 years. But all of it crunched into 400-500 pages, and then of course looking forward. But as I was driving here, the interesting thing that I found, when you look at history with such a vast brush, with such a swathe of paradigms and investigation and conclusions, you suddenly realize how small you are. You start feeling small, and you feel, President Rajapakse of Sri Lanka, he's trying to fight and become president, and somebody's trying to remove him, and the morning newspapers, how small they become. And it's this which is fascinating, that I think what you've done, what you've pushed people, even Barack Obama, and a lot of people now who are in the pipeline making TV serials about these books, is to sort of step back a little and to see the vast and the background and the big context that we are part of. And I think if everybody takes that little step back and looks at contexts, the historical context, our vast history, I think a lot of the present becomes clearer, and most of all, you become a little more humble, which is what is very important. Just to launch it off, where did this journey begin? I read somewhere you were researching the Middle Ages battles or historical formations of military warfare in the Middle Ages, and somewhere in that research, Sapiens was born. Could you tell us a little about that?
Well, yeah, originally I was a specialist in medieval military history, as you say. But what really launched Sapiens was a course I was given at the Hebrew University, which was just Introduction to History for first-year students, which almost none of the other professors wanted to teach, because it was considered too broad and too shallow and unscientific. And I didn't have a position at the university at the time, so whatever they gave me, I would say yes. And they looked for somebody to teach this course that nobody wanted to teach, and I took it. And I didn't know much about what I was teaching. I was basically studying the material 1 or 2 steps ahead of the students. I was, again, a specialist in the Middle Ages, and suddenly I had to teach about the beginning of agriculture, or the invention of money, or Neanderthals and other ancient human species. And the book came out of this course, and out of the reaction of the students, which made me realize how much hunger and thirst there is in young people and in everybody for a good understanding of history. Many people think that history is very boring, and I still get a lot of reactions to my book, that people write that I always thought that history was the most boring subject in school, and suddenly, thanks to this book, I realized it's actually interesting, because it shapes the life of people today. I mean, most people, when you start telling them about some ancient kings and battles and this king or that king, they fall asleep. Largely because they don't see how this has anything to do with my life. What do I care about these ancient kings that died 1,000 years ago? But when you start explaining to them really the key issues and ideas of history, that history is still shaping your life today. That, say, family relations, the gender relations, the way that we understand relations between men and women are shaped to some extent by these developments thousands of years ago. If you want to understand why in most human societies, even today, women have a lower position relative to men, economically, politically, legally, then you need to understand history. That this is not the result just of a law of nature or biology, this is the result of historical processes. So when you talk to students suddenly about these things, they become very interested. And this is how the book was written. It actually in conversation with the students and seeing what they find to be important and relevant and what they find to be boring and unimportant.
I think what you've done is a certain human service in reinterpreting, redefining a lot which is already known, but you've put it in terms which is both understandable and exciting, which is history as seen from the present and how you're going to live your future, how you're going to define your future. So that's what people are searching for, and if history makes the future relevant, I think that's very important. Now, that's the question I'd like to ask you because it struck me as pretty significant. A lot of history, the development of cognition, the discovery of agriculture, the step-by-step, the boring process as you define it, has already been written by historians. I think how you've done it is in a bit of an edgy way. How you've said it is you've sort of taken a chimpanzee. I saw your TED talk in London. The chimpanzee who kind of he discusses, who talks about his, who's interested in his bananas. Now beyond the bananas, he comes together as a tribe, as a group, maybe to get those bananas, but not beyond that. The human being takes a step ahead by doing the teamwork. So this you carried on to define it as the objective reality of the chimpanzee and the bananas, but where the human being steps forward or beyond that is that he creates a fictional reality. He wants to create a world as he thinks and that cognition. Now, that's the question I'd like to ask you. Now, the development of cognition, the development of teamwork, the discovery of agriculture, these are well-known things, but the way you've put it as a such sort of contradiction between objective reality and fiction, which has driven man to control the universe and the earth, I think that's what is taken off. Now, the question to you is, do you think you've redefined or reanalyzed history, or have you contributed something new to the understanding of history?
Most of my work is synthesis. These are very few new facts that people didn't know before. It's mostly taking very well-known facts and developments and putting them together in a new way that makes you see both the past and also the present and the future from a new perspective. So, like you just said, with teamwork and with fictions and with stories, the main argument, maybe the most important argument of my first book, Sapiens, and also the underlying argument of the other two books, is that humans control the world because we can cooperate much better than any other animal. And the reason we can cooperate much better than any other animal is because we can invent fictional stories and believe in them. And this is for most people quite startling, because we tend to think that yes, of course we are the best animals in the world, but because we are so intelligent and we are so rational and things like that. And you tell to people, no, it's not your rationality, it's actually your imagination. It's your ability to believe in fictions. It's your sometimes ability to believe in nonsense. The chimpanzees will never agree to believe in these things. Only humans can believe in these things. And this is why we control them and not they control us. And for most people, it's very easy to accept that other people believe in fiction, but not us, not outright, not our nation. So, but most people find it easy to accept that yes, most people, except our tribe of course, organize themselves on the basis of believing in fictions and legends. I mean, even most religious people will accept that all religions except one are fictions. Our religion, of course, this is the exception. This, no, it's a different story. But yes, I mean, most people find it when they think about it, they realize the immense importance of these fictional stories, and that you cannot find any large-scale human cooperation which is not based on some kind of fictional story. Now, again, with religion it's easy. The really interesting point is to realize that this is also true of things like economics, that corporations and money are fictional stories, just like the stories of the Bible, or of this god, or that goddess, and that, money has absolute, unlike bananas, which have an objective reality. Money, the rupee, or the dollar, or the euro, it has absolutely no objective reality whatsoever. It is simply a story told by the most successful storytellers in the world, the big bankers and finance ministers, and as long as everybody believes in the story, it works. I mean, my point is not to say that all this is fiction, stop believing in it. It's just the opposite, just to be amazed by what you can do with a successful story. That two chimpanzees that don't know each other cannot cooperate at all. But I can go out of this hotel, go to some store in Mumbai, take out a rupee, and buy a banana, and they will give me the banana, which is amazing because they don't know me. But they are still willing to cooperate with me because we both trust the same story about the rupee. Until the government comes and says, oh, no, this now is nothing. It's just a piece of paper, there is nothing to do with it. And then there is a crisis.
So I found that was, talk about making things non-boring, and I think, that's something really provocative, to say that the only real story which everybody believes in is money.
Yeah.
I somewhere in your book, that concepts of nationalism is a story which we all believe in. Not everybody, some people. Story of God, some people believe in, some don't. It's a story which is partly believed in. There are a lot of atheists, the number is increasing. But the story of money, whether you're an atheist or not, or whether you are an American or a Fijian, everybody believes in the story of money. But that's the question to ask you, is when a story is told by everyone and believed by everyone, and in a Goebbelsian way, sort of spread all around, that everybody absorbs it, then it becomes reality, doesn't it?
Yeah, our reality is built through these stories. They are still fiction in the sense that it's just in our minds. There is nothing really out there. But if you can convince billions of people to believe in the same story, then this is the most powerful thing in the world. This is what enables trade networks and armies and countries to function. And this is the most powerful thing in the world. So, and this is one of the main ideas of the books, that the most powerful forces that shape history are the stories in which people believe.
The other thing which you've dealt with in your books, from Beyond Sapiens, the sequel, and also the 21 questions, is the future. Now, I think, the weight of history and the ability of humankind to slowly expurgate the way of thinking into artificial intelligence, computers and so on, you've argued that slowly it is running its life. And we're moving towards a sort of apocalypse, which is possible, which is your sequel, the future that you're talking about. Now, somewhere how do you define where human being has taken control of Mother Earth and everything around him, controlling the universe, and in a very kind of violent way almost? Where is the bite back? How does objective reality bite humankind back? I mean, which is something you've tried to say in so many ways.
Well, we are now seeing that we are facing an ecological crisis, an ecological collapse, because of climate change and global warming, and there is still an objective reality out there. So some leaders may tell us that no, climate change is just a story in your mind, and you can go on consuming and producing as much as you want. But in the end, there is still an objective reality out there, and if we are not careful, then it will eventually bite back. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 50 years. But, and the key development in the 21st century is that we are now acquiring abilities to change some aspect of objective reality which were impossible to change before, especially our bodies and our brains. With bioengineering and genetic engineering and artificial intelligence, for the first time, humans are gaining really divine abilities of creation, which previously people thought only the gods can do it, but now we can do it. We can start redesigning life itself. And this means that the stories in which we believe are even more important than ever before, because in the past, you know, religion can tell people, okay, let's come together and build a big temple. And we can do that. But it couldn't change the human body. If, for example, a lot of religions, for example, said were very hostile to sexuality or to some aspect of sexual behavior, they couldn't change human nature and they couldn't change the human body. So even if some people become monks, most people couldn't. And even quite a lot of monks did not always keep their vows of sexual chastity. But in the future, we could have the technology to redesign human sexuality. And it can go in all kinds of directions. It can go in a very permissive way of enabling people when the whole division of genders into men and women will break down. Because with biotechnology and even with virtual realities, the gender identity will become much more fluid. At the same time, the same technology can be used maybe by religious fanatics to maybe completely destroy human sexuality. For the first time, if some religious fanatical sect comes to power in a particular country, maybe they can start changing the human body to fit their religious fantasies. So we are now more powerful than ever before. But it doesn't mean that there is a single future. It means that there are many different futures we can create with this technology. And what we believe, the stories, the fantasies, the religions, the ideologies that we believe are likely to shape the future of life in ways which were previously unimaginable.
In many ways, I think you're arguing that there's an element of becoming slaves of our intelligence. Though it's still an open discussion, you are joined the discussion, others are warning against it. But do you think somewhere we need to stop? I read somewhere it's a kind of definition of defining it as something between a battle between intelligence and consciousness. So somewhere does consciousness call a halt to this form of our intelligence taking away our genetic makeup, our basic human factors, our basic human emotions, etc. Somewhere do we call a halt?
You can't halt the progress of technology completely, but you can try and influence the direction it's taking. And it's very important to especially explore not just, I mean, at present we focus a lot on intelligence, and especially in creating artificial intelligence in computers, while we neglect the exploration of the human mind and human consciousness. And the danger is that we will use the new technologies to upgrade some parts of some human skills, which especially governments and corporations find very useful. And we neglect the development of other parts of other human skills, or other parts of the human potential, which we know about very little. So the result might be very intelligent people maybe, but that lack empathy or lack spiritual depth. So it could lead to a downgrade of humans and not to their upgrade. Again, it all depends on the different ideologies and ideas that people have. So maybe this is a good note to ask some of the people here. What are the stories or ideas or ideologies that they are most concerned about? Because there isn't just a single future or a single concern. There are many parallel alternative futures that we have before us.
So 2 more questions, then we'll throw it open to the house. One very absorbing and very interesting discussion you've thrown up in the books is the question of agriculture. The discovery of agriculture not seeing it as something progressive, but something which is, I mean, in your own words, in agriculture we do not domesticate wheat. Wheat has domesticated us. Somewhere you've called agriculture is probably the biggest crime of history, where people have become, settled, that food gathering kind of push has gone away. People have become obese. They've gone against their very nature of being tribal and food gathering. And a lot of the problems today we are facing to do with how we think and act go back to our discovery of agriculture. I think it's a very exciting idea which everybody won't accept, but it would be interesting to discuss it.
Well, very briefly, I mean, agriculture was a very good idea if you were a king or a priest, or if you are a middle-class person today, you enjoy much better life. But for the average person, after the agricultural revolution, say the average peasant in ancient India, life was actually much harder after the agricultural revolution than before. We usually don't think about it because almost all of history, almost all of art, all of philosophy is written by the people who enjoyed the benefits of agriculture and not by the peasants who actually had to go to the field and work every day. So this distorts our image. And if you broaden the perspective and think about it from the viewpoint of animals, it becomes even more clear, because maybe the agricultural revolution was good for some humans, but for most animals it was a terrible disaster. The wild animals were increasingly exterminated and driven to make way for rice fields and so forth. And the domesticated animals, the pigs, the chickens, the cows, they are probably the most miserable animals that ever existed. In most cultures, in most of history, they were just treated as machines for producing milk and meat and eggs and power for humanity. And the life of a domesticated chicken or a domesticated cow, say today in industrial agriculture, is probably worse than the life of almost any other animal that existed in history.
Did that this realization drive you to be a vegan? Or?
Yeah, I try to be a vegan, to limit as far as possible my involvement with this industry.
A very class understanding of history, a kind of struggle between classes, almost Marxian I would say, where you say that more and more people, because of this, the development of agriculture and the technology which goes along with it, have become a class of useless tribals who spend their time playing computer games and engaging in drugs. I think somebody said that. And it sort of worries you. It concerns you that with technology and with the ability to control nature, an increasing number of people are going to be doing that. How do we deal with it?
Yeah, one of the main concerns of the future is that as especially artificial intelligence improves, and we are just in the beginning of the AI revolution, and as it improves in the coming years, it will outperform humans in more and more tasks, and might therefore push hundreds of millions of people out of the job market. Now, there will be new jobs, but the new jobs will demand retraining and reinventing. And it's going to be very difficult, especially for developing countries, to retrain their workforce. If you are a truck driver and you are now 50 years old and you've been driving a truck for the last 30 years and you now lost your job because there is a self-driving vehicle, they don't need you. And there is a new job in computer design or software engineering. But you don't just come to the office of the computer company and say, hey, I heard you have a new job, I'm a truck driver, would you let me design your software? They won't. You need to retrain yourself. Now, how do you retrain a 50-year-old truck driver to be a software engineer? It's going to take time, it will take a lot of money. Some countries, like the USA, are rich, so maybe they can afford to retrain their workforce. But the worst problems will not be in the USA. They will be in Mexico, they will be in Honduras, they will be in India, in Bangladesh. How will these countries retrain their workforce? So some people say, okay, we'll have universal basic income. We'll raise taxes on the big corporation, which will make a lot of money from all the AI, and use that to support the poor people who lost their jobs. But most people, when they talk about this, they actually mean national basic income, not universal basic income. They think we raise taxes in California on Google and Facebook and use that to pay a basic income to unemployed truck drivers in Pennsylvania. But what about the unemployed truck drivers in India or in Mexico? Now, do you think that the US government will raise taxes in California and send the money to India to pay the... It's not going to happen. So, if we don't do something about it, the result will be a huge split in the world between a few countries which will become extremely rich from the AI revolution and a lot of countries which will completely collapse. And we see it before in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, with the split between the few industrial powers like Britain and most of the world. And the situation now is even worse, because after the Industrial Revolution, what enabled countries like India to start catching up with the industrial powers like Britain was relying to a large extent on cheap labor. This was the most important asset of a country like India or like Bangladesh. What can they offer? The economy, they can offer cheap labor. So we have all these textile factories moving from Britain to Bangladesh or to India. But when the AI revolution comes, cheap labor will be the least important thing, because this is exactly the easiest thing to replace, is the textile workers and the truck drivers. So what will poor countries have that enables them to start making progress? We just don't know. So the big danger is that there will be a split between countries and also within countries, between a small part of humanity that has all the skills and gains all the benefits, and a large part of humanity which becomes really useless. Not just, in the 20th century, speaking of Marxism, in the 20th century the big fight was against exploitation. We don't want the upper classes and the rich countries to exploit the poor. But in the 21st century, the main issue may not be exploitation, it might be irrelevance. That the poor people and the poor countries, they are not exploited, they are just irrelevant. They are not needed for anything. And this is actually a much, much worse situation than being exploited.
One last question, and you may, if you feel like not answer it. do you believe in God? Because for us in India,
No.
the Ram temple is a major issue.
Short answer, no.
Okay. So now we have a mic going around. We have last one.
Namaskar. I'm Vivek Agrawal. I just want to put a very simple question, that what is your take on the biggest conflict in the humankind history, and do you find any reality into it, or as per your book, so many places you have written that there is only a fiction story. So what would be your take on that?
Well, most conflicts in history were again about fictions and stories, not about. Some people imagine that wars and revolutions are mostly about objective resources like land or like food. That, like chimpanzees or wolves, we fight over territory and food. But in most cases, this is not true. Most wars and revolutions in history were not about territory or about food. If you think, say, a century ago, the First World War, it wasn't really about territory or food. There was enough food in Europe to feed everybody, and there was enough territory to build houses for all the Germans and all the British and all the French. They still went to war because they couldn't agree on a single story which everybody believes, a single identity. If you look today Europe is very, very peaceful. Why is Europe so peaceful now? It's not because they have more territory. They actually have far less territory. In 1914, European countries controlled most of the world, and it wasn't enough for them. They still had to go to war. Today, the European countries don't control, they have no empires, and they live in peace. Because they managed to find a story that they all agree on. And similarly, I look at my country in Israel. So the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is not really about territory. There is enough territory to build houses for everybody. There is enough food. But the people in the country, they can't agree on a common story, a common identity. And this is why they fight. So yes, the fight eventually becomes a fight about territory. I want to have, this is my city, no, this is my city. But they fight not because there is not enough land for both of them. It's because they have a different story, in this case again a religious story. God promised all these territories to me. And the other said, no, God promised this territory to me, it's not yours. And they can't agree on the story, so they fight.
Hello, this is Homo Deus. In comparison to other countries, what special you see in Indian culture?
You mean today or in history?
In nowadays.
Well, I will say something. I'm not an expert on India or Indian culture, so I will say something more general. Every country in the world thinks it is special. And India is not special in this regard. India also thinks it is special. And last month I've been to China, so the Chinese are convinced they are the most special culture in the world. And in my country in Israel, it's the same. The Jews are convinced we are the most important, even though we're very small people, we are the most important people. And you will be amazed that even very small people who have very little influence on history, they are still convinced we are the most important and most special. And this is partly a result of you go to school. So in every country, the schools usually teach children that only, they focus on the history of their country and their culture, and they usually say that this is the most important. And most children in Israel, they grow up thinking that the entire human history is revolving around the Jewish people and around Israel. And when you try to explain them that this is not true, they refuse to accept it. But we are now living in a global world. And I think it is, in order to survive in the 21st century, different countries need to realize that they are not so special, because actually they all face the same problems, And the problems can be solved only through global cooperation. If you think about climate change, then India is facing a huge danger of climate change, of desertification, and the rise of the oceans. If climate change continues, Mumbai will be taken over by the Indian Ocean in a couple of decades. And the same problem they have in Brazil, they have in China, and the only way to solve climate change is if all the countries cooperate. None is special. And it's the same we talked about earlier about genetic engineering and about artificial intelligence. If you're afraid of people misusing genetic engineering to do things that are dangerous to the future of humanity, you cannot stop it on the level of one country. Say India can have a ban forbidding genetic engineering on humans, but Indian government has no force over scientists in China or the USA. So what happens if the Chinese are doing genetic experiments on humans and they are getting all kinds of advances because of that? So in 20 years, even the Indians will say, we cannot afford to stay behind. We must, like the Chinese, start doing genetic engineering. So if you're afraid of the potential of genetic engineering, it should be obvious the only way to regulate this explosive technology is by having some kind of global consensus. And in order to reach a global consensus, each country must realize that it is not as special as it tends to think it is.
Harish wanted to ask a question.
It's my attention that the technological advances and the internet have created more minorities, more fragmented. What you said was the monolithic narrative about say, religion or money or nationalism for that matter. But it's also our experience that these minorities tend to be more easily armed with the power of subversiveness than, let's say, the more monolithic narratives do. So how do you see this conflict as opposed to the binaries of rich versus poor or how the relevance of the West?
No, first of all, it has a very good aspect that a lot of groups which previously had no voice and weren't heard, they now do have a voice and they do demand attention, and this is something very positive. The problem is that it is becoming much more difficult politically to govern countries and to reach a consensus when you have to take into account 50 different groups and not just two. And presently we are facing a crisis, a political crisis. One of the dangers is that people will run back to some sort of totalitarian or dictatorial regime because they say, oh, it's too complicated, so we just need to have one person in charge with a single story, everybody must believe it, and this is the only way to run the country. And this, I think, is a huge mistake, which will result in immense suffering to humankind, especially because if you have just one person in charge and one story, as long as this person is doing good, then everything is okay. But if they make a mistake, this is a mistake with colossal consequences, especially given the technological abilities that governments have today. We saw a wave of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century with Hitler and Stalin and Mao, and luckily, eventually this wave receded. And almost all people in most countries came to live in much more free societies. But now we see the beginning of another totalitarian wave, and it could be far more extreme than what happened with Hitler and Stalin and Mao because of the new technologies. Now governments can gain the technology to monitor and survey all the people all the time, 24 hours a day. They can look not just at what you do, but they now gain the technology to look inside you. What is happening inside your body, inside your brain? Just think about, say, something like North Korea. In 20 years, maybe every citizen in North Korea has to wear a biometric bracelet or a biometric sensor that monitors your heart rate, your blood pressure, your brain activity 24 hours a day. And the minute you start even thinking or feeling something against the government, they already know it. In the day of Stalin, so Stalin could control what you do, but he couldn't actually know what you're thinking. At least you had your inner reality free from the government. But in 20 or 30 years, they can get inside your head, literally. So this will be far more extreme than anything we've seen before. And so we need to beware of a return to totalitarianism and to dictatorship. And I think that even though we do see the rise of a lot of new groups, so far at least, political relations are much more peaceful than in the past. The greatest, probably the greatest political and social revolution of the last century has been the feminist revolution, which changed relations between men and women, which haven't changed for thousands of years. You know, you had for thousands of years, we had so many revolutions and wars, and it changed so much, but gender relations didn't change. And in the last century, this was the biggest revolution of all. And the amazing thing about it was that it was so peaceful. Very, very few people were killed during the feminist revolution. You think how many people were killed during the Russian Revolution? How many people were killed during the Partition War in India at the end of the British Raj? So many people. And so few people were killed during the feminist revolution.
Only people lost their jobs.
Some, and some gained. But it means that we can do tremendous changes socially and politically without violence. And even when you look at everybody talking about the rise of nationalism again in Europe, but what strikes me so far is how peaceful everything still is. Maybe in 5 years there'll be a war. But so far, you look at Brexit. In the past, a question like whether Britain should be part of the European Union or not could only be decided through a major war. But now, in 2016, they just went and had the referendum. A single person was killed, an MP murdered by some fanatic, and they just voted. And like also the Scottish referendum, whether Scotland should be independent. When India wanted to be independent from Britain, it took a huge war with millions of people killed and expelled from their houses and so forth. With Scotland, they just go, they vote, and when they lose the vote, they just go and drink whiskey. They do nothing. I mean, they accept the result of the referendum. So we should, despite all this talk about political extremism and the disintegration of consensus, so far we are still living in the most peaceful era in history.
I think Sunil has a question.
How do you differentiate between intelligence and consciousness? And will consciousness be able to influence AI?
Well, intelligence is the ability to solve problems, to win in chess, to drive a car, to diagnose a disease. These are all problems solved by intelligence. Now, consciousness is the ability to feel things, to feel pain and pleasure and love and hate. Now, we tend to confuse the two because in human beings, intelligence and consciousness go together. We solve problems by having feelings. When we drive a car, or even when we play chess, many of the decisions we take are based on feelings. So it's very difficult for us to differentiate the two. But in computers, they are completely different. Computers now have very high intelligence in particular fields. Like in chess, computers are far more intelligent than humans. Or in driving cars or diagnosing disease, computers are becoming better than humans. But computers have zero consciousness. Computers don't solve problems by having feelings. They have a completely different way of solving problems. And there is no development at all so far of computer consciousness. So all these movies about computers gaining consciousness and the robots starting to fall in love, and all, this is science fiction. It is not science. And we might reach a point where the world is dominated by computer intelligence But still, computers have absolutely no consciousness, no feelings, no emotions, no sensations, no nothing. And this is dangerous. We need to invest at least as much effort in exploring and developing human consciousness as we invest in developing and exploring computer intelligence. Otherwise, as I said before, we might end up with a very intelligent but non-conscious entities controlling the world.
Let's have some gender equality. Also introduce, I think we should just so that
My name is Anandika Ghosh. I write the business paper Content. In the history of humanity, so much of conflict has been about the pursuit of power, but also the pursuit of beauty. Based on how our concept of beauty has changed in the last many centuries, where do you see the concept of beauty changing in the future? Because beauty was also tied to biology, and you spoke about gender and other kinds of interventions. So we don't need beauty anymore to understand about perfect being. So do you think beauty has no role in the future?
Well, beauty has an extremely important role in human psychology and human culture. What we see now is two opposite trends or developments. On the one hand, we see a unification of beauty concepts all over the world. That the same ideas about beauty are now spread in more and more countries and more regions. And which actually also causes people to feel far less satisfied with the way they look than ever before in history. People today are more beautiful than ever before because they suffer far less from disease because of the advance in medicine. And at the same time, people feel more ugly than ever before. Why? Because they are more exposed to unrealistic standards of beauty. Like, 2,000 years ago, if I was some peasant in some small village, maybe in India. So I compare myself to the other 50 men in the village. It's the only other men I know. So I feel quite happy with the way I look, because I look okay. But today, even if you live in some small village in India, not even in Mumbai, every day you are exposed to the most beautiful people in the world. On the television, in the cinema, on your smartphone, you have the movie industry and the advertising industry. They find the 50 most beautiful men in the world, in India, in the United States, in Brazil, anywhere. They, this is the most beautiful, okay, let's take him. And I see these men every day. So no wonder I feel much less satisfied with the way I look, because this is now my standard of beauty. So you have like 50 men, which are the standard of beauty for all the world. So this is one development. The other development, which we may see in the coming decades, again with technology, is that we are gaining better and better abilities to manipulate the human body and the human mind. So we have plastic surgery now, but in a couple of decades, maybe we can do genetic changes to make people even more beautiful, and we can break the rules of the human body, which were in place for millions of years with new technology. And we can also change people's minds about, again, the standards of beauty, or what is considered beauty. People spend more and more time, or will spend, in virtual realities. And you could start creating completely new bodies and faces for humans, which are unrelated to biological or even physical laws. I mean, there is one of the famous facts about, the Barbie dolls that are now the standard of beauty for girls all over the world, is that a real woman, if her body was like a Barbie doll, she would immediately die. The proportions of the organs of the body in a typical Barbie doll are such that it's impossible to live with this body. But in a virtual reality, you can have anybody you want. You want 6 arms, you can have 6 arms. You want 2 heads, you can have 2 heads. So we might see completely new standards of beauty, which previously we encountered maybe only in mythology. But increasingly, we can actually try and fulfill them in our own lives.
Hi, my name is Rachita, and Satyajit here and I, we run the Open Library project. It is a non-fiction book library service which is offered on subscription to businesses. So what we're trying to do is curate libraries at corporates according to their industries. So we also started a podcast series, and you were kind enough to email us your 5 non-fiction book recommendations, which included Brave New World and Enlightenment Now. So I actually wanted to know that, what is the most striking thing for you in these books, or why would you recommend this to our listeners?
Yeah, I tend to recommend books that kind of, widen people's horizons, because, there's so many books out there in the world, and especially if you talk about science books. So every science book can teach you something. But most books, they add just a few more facts to the pile of facts that we know. And what I find is really the most interesting books are the books that take the pile of facts and rearrange it in a new way and enable you to see the world differently and to ask new questions that you didn't even ask before. So this is usually my basis for recommending a particular book.
Books really do give very new questions.
So we passed Brave New World, I think. We've already done that milestone. Anyway, Alka, I think, wants to ask.
So I have a question on, do you believe in data protection, like on the background of Cambridge Analytica and all those cases? What I want to know, like in India, we are still in process of making data protection rules. Okay, so where those rules are existing, do you think any future differences between artificial intelligence and the impact and implications which you have mentioned?
Yeah, data protection is very important because data is now becoming the most important asset in the world, both politically and economically. It's much more important than land is, it's more important even than money. In most industries, the most important data is to understand your customers and what they want and their desires and how to influence them. And it's the same in politics, that the politicians want to know, to understand the people and to know what they want and how to influence them and how to manipulate them. And previously in history it was impossible. But now, with the help of the new technologies, you can gather enough data on individual people, on all the population, and you have enough computing power to analyze this data. And this becomes the key, both for political success and for business success. And so far all this has been serving mainly the big governments and the corporations. And people are giving up the most important asset for free, without any control of what is being done with it, without even knowing what is being done, and without being compensated for it. So I think that we need to think about how to regulate data, but it's very difficult because we have no experience with that. If you think about the regulation of land, so for thousands of years, people have had experience with how to regulate the ownership of land, how to divide land between people, and what does it mean to own land. So with land, it's easy today to conceptualize it. If I have a field, then I can build a fence around the field, and I have a gate, and I stand at the gate, and I say, you can come in and you can't come in. This is my field, I decide. It's easy to understand. But with data, we don't even have a concept of what does it mean for me to own my data. Let's take my most personal data, my medical data. like my DNA. What does it mean that I own my DNA? I can have a printout, I can do a DNA scan and have a printout of my DNA and keep it in a safe. But you can have millions of other copies of this DNA, and all kinds of corporations and governments can have it and can do experiments on it, and I don't even know. And I do want to share my personal data with some people, like with my doctor, and I do want that researchers can use my data to discover a new treatment for cancer or something. But how do I make sure they don't abuse it or sell it to somebody else? And what happens afterwards? And we have no framework, no experience of how to do it. So there are many new ideas, like you have the regulations in the European Union, and you have ideas about having something like a trade union data, that individuals are not in a position to really decide what to do with their personal data. It's too complicated. But I can join maybe a data union, which has, like you have the union of truck drivers, so you can have a union of data owners, of 10 million people in the union. And you have the leadership of the union, and they have experts, and they can, for example, manage deals. Like they can come to Facebook, or they can come to Tencent, to some other big company, and say, okay, we will sell you the data of our 10 million union members, but for these conditions, and we want a share of the profits. At present, it is not happening. One of the big dangers, again, goes back to the question of inequality between countries, is that we might have a new kind of colonialism, data colonialism. You know, in the 19th century, during the era of colonialism, so the colonial power like Britain, it would take raw materials from a country like India, it would take cotton, or it would take iron or coal, and ship it to Britain, and then they make textiles, which is a high quality business, and send it back and sell it, and make a lot of profit. This was the business model of colonialism in the 19th century. Now it can happen again with data. That you mine, you harvest raw data in a country like India, and you send it, say, to China, and there they make all the complicated analytical research and produce all the advanced technology, and then sell it back. And it was actually done with the data from India, but nobody is getting paid for it. I'll give a very concrete example with self-driving vehicles, which are now being developed in Europe, in the United States, in China. One of the biggest problems with developing self-driving vehicles is that most governments won't allow self-driving vehicles to drive on the road in a real city until they are completely safe. But to make them completely safe, you need a lot of data. As long as they just drive in a laboratory, it's not enough. You need the self-driving vehicles to drive in a real life situation, in a real city, and see what happens. And there are all kinds of accidents you couldn't anticipate. And you take this data and you improve the self-driving vehicle until it is safe enough. Now, a country like Germany will not allow the self-driving vehicle in Berlin because it's not safe enough. So what might happen is that they will test the self-driving vehicles in developing countries, in poor countries, which have much more poor regulations. And then the accidents will be in India or in Mexico or in Honduras. They take the data, they improve the vehicles, and then they can sell it also in Germany or in Japan, and also sell it back to India or to Mexico. And the valuable data was obtained from the poor country. But all the revenues will be going to the rich country. And at present, there are no, if you want to mine iron or oil in a country, you have to pay something for it. But if you mine data in a country, so far you don't pay anything. You have the big corporations from China or the US mining data in India or in Mexico or in Brazil, and most of the time they pay nothing for the data they are mining. So these are just a few thoughts about the...
But beyond payment, Professor, it's also the question of control, which Snowden warned about. So it's not just North Korea, which is the most apparent example, but it is the US, the most democratic of countries, which is mining 95% of the data and using it against its own citizens. That's what Snowden warned against, and today he is a fugitive. So, you know, our whole definition of democracy, totalitarianism, has been changed by the question which Alka has pointed out, the data, the question of how do you gather it.
Yeah, I mean, today the key issue is the ownership of data. If in the past dictatorship was that all the land belongs to a single emperor, so this is a dictatorship in ancient times, today the question is not who owns the land, but who owns the data. If all the data is owned by the government or by some big corporation, then this is the 21st century version of a dictatorship.
We have time for more questions? 1 or 10 minutes, okay.
Please, my name is Thomas. I am from Kochi, Kerala. I have a question. Sorry. How you explain the theory of involvement of aliens in the research?
Aliens from outer space.
Yeah.
Well, as far as I know, we have no scientific evidence for any influence of aliens on history. Scientists are not against this theory. They will be very happy to find such evidence. It will revolutionize our understanding of biology, of history. But we are waiting for the evidence. As long as nobody, in science, evidence is the king. Very often in religion, in ideology, you can tell any story you like without evidence. But in science, if you have no evidence, it's not a scientific theory. And as far as I know, so far nobody has found any convincing evidence for alien involvement in human history. And again, some people say there is a conspiracy of scientists to hide this. Actually, there is evidence, but they don't want to publish it. But I don't see what scientists will gain from. I mean, actually, scientists will be very happy. Like some people say that the pyramids in Egypt were built by aliens. But what I know some people who specialize in ancient Egypt. They will be extremely happy if this was true, because then they will get a lot of money and a lot of students. At present, almost nobody goes to study ancient Egypt, and they get very, very little money from the university and the government, because everybody says, who cares about ancient Egypt? Now, if aliens build the pyramids, then suddenly ancient Egypt is the most interesting topic in the university. Everybody will leave the computer science department, the medicine. Nobody wants to be a computer science. Everybody wants to be a specialist in ancient Egypt, because this is how you get to know the amazing technology of the aliens. So I'm actually very impressed by the integrity of the people, of the scientists who deal with ancient Egypt, even though they have a very strong incentive to spread these stories that the pyramids were built by aliens. They don't do it because they don't have the evidence.
Right, you have it.
I'm Lanesh Pravitz, I'm a scientist. So my question is the Homo sapiens will have a very driving force. The story will be more powerful and more important than the past. And the humans have this uncanny ability of believing the things that don't exist. And of course, the piece was that if you had a singular story. With singular story, people believe in one story. Similarly, I don't see a similar powerful driving idea when you go beyond, because that Homo sapiens was human-centric. Going beyond this, could it be that humans have to develop an uncanny ability of believing in plural story? And our thing may be more planet-centric rather than the human-centric.
Yeah, I mean, to go forward and to unite the whole of humankind in an effort to fight against climate change, or in an effort to regulate artificial intelligence and bioengineering, we need new stories that belong not just to one culture or one religion, but stories that can unite people of different cultures and different religions. And this is not impossible. I think it is possible. To some extent, already today, humans cooperate more than ever before. To give a simple example, like I know that in India, football is less popular sport than say cricket, but in most of the world, football is the most important sport. And like last year, or actually this year, in Russia, we had the World Football Cup. And you saw people coming from Argentina, from France, from Japan, Muslims and atheists and Christians, everybody coming to Russia to play a game together. And even though it is often seen as a competition between countries, actually it is a display of harmony between countries. Because the amazing thing is everybody agrees on the same rules. If you don't agree on the rules, you can't play. If the Argentinians have one version of football and the French have another version of football, they can't play. And the amazing thing is they can't play because they all agree on it. And you know, these are football hooligans. They are not necessarily the easiest people to agree with on things. So, even though the last few years we saw a greater and greater isolationism and conflict in the world, still we need to realize that we are much more united than in any previous time in history. And this gives hope that we can come together to, at least with regard to the main challenges we face, to cooperate in the face of these challenges.
We have one, please.
Professor Harari, you have mentioned in the Homo Deus that people can live up to the age of 165 or 170 in future when the technology develops. And you have mentioned that Stalin would be the ruling Russia still now. And on the other side, the artificial intelligence, instead of one particular specialized doctor, an artificial intelligent doctor, he can incorporate many specialties together, and with the data, he can diagnose within seconds. So, with the collaboration of this old society with 165 years old and the artificial intelligence working together, what will be the future? Where will a new generation comes then if these two together decide that we are in a sphere?
Well, I mean, these are not forecasts, they are just possibilities. We don't know what will actually happen. And what is crucial to realize about technology is that every technology can be used to create very different kinds of societies. So yes, AI will continue to develop, but this could result in an extreme totalitarian system. It could also result in a very peaceful, democratic, open society. AI by itself doesn't tell us what to do with it. It's like in the past, you think about a technology like radio or like newspapers. So in the Soviet Union, all the radio stations and all the newspapers just were owned and served the government. So radio was used to brainwash people with government propaganda. At the same time, in other countries, there are many, many different independent radio stations. So you have the freedom to express and to listen to many different views. Now the radio, the technology, doesn't care. The radio doesn't care if it is used for propaganda or for free speech. This is up to humans to decide. And it will be the same with the new technologies of the 21st century. So I don't know, and nobody knows, how the society will look like in 50 years or 100 years. We can know that yes, AI will be a major factor, it will change everything. But in what way it will change, that depends on the political decisions that people make.
We have one more. So, welcome to Land of Buddha. And I've been preaching your books all over the world. I have read every single line what you have written, listened to every single podcast what you have done right from the San Francisco Bible. And it works great for Sapiens, it works great for Homo Deus, and there is a lots of fan following of atheist people. And then you talk about meditation in 21st century. Simple question, how do you convince an atheist to turn to meditation?
Well, you don't. I mean, I don't believe in convincing people to do this or to do that. It usually goes badly if you start becoming a missionary. I think that the best way is through your own behavior and action. If you say meditate, and because you meditate, you are more peaceful, you're a nicer person, then people want to know how you do it, and you tell them, and then, oh, I'll try it also. And then it can work. I think this is the best way to spread any idea, is not to talk about it, but to actually embody it in the way that you live and behave. And if it gives good benefits, then people get attracted.
One second.
Nowadays there is a lot of talk of sustainability, assuming the limited resources of Earth. And as we see the historical development, even the nationalism, or this is just the stage in historical development. And now our nations are coming together, forming the unions. So in future, in response to the whatever challenges, technological, all these things, do you see any possibility of the word new order, like global government or something like that, to face all the tensions that we have?
It is possible. I mean, there is no limit to the number of people that can be united in a single political system. Today, even small countries like Israel have more people in them than the entire world population 10,000 years ago. So certainly if you look at India, with more than 1 billion people, can, despite all the difficulties, can live together in a single political system. It's possible also on the level of the whole world. But you need unified values and culture and so forth. At present, it seems unlikely that we can establish a real world union in the next 20, 40, 50 years. The world is still divided into nation states. But I think this is not an impossible barrier for global cooperation. Some people, like the US President Donald Trump, they speak as if there is a contradiction between nationalism and globalism. You have to choose. You're a nationalist or a globalist. But I think there is no contradiction. I think today a good nationalist should be a good globalist. Because if you think nationalism is hating foreigners, then yes, you can't be a nationalist and a globalist. But nationalism isn't hating foreigners. Nationalism is caring about the safety and prosperity of people in your nation. And in the 21st century, in order to ensure the safety and prosperity of people in your nation, you have to cooperate with people in other nations. So a good nationalist must be also a good globalist. So we don't need a global government, but every national government should place global issues at the top of the agenda. So if you have an election, so when politicians are talking about their agenda, so people should ask politicians in every country, if we elect you, what will you do about climate change? If we elect you, what will you do about artificial intelligence and bioengineering? What is your vision for the future of humankind in 30 years? And if a politician has no vision and don't know what to do about climate change or about AI, then we shouldn't vote for this politician. And hopefully, if enough politicians around the world are aware of these global issues and are willing to cooperate, then we don't need a global government. We just need global cooperation.
So we'll have two last questions, and you have the mic.
Till last century, there were people like Gandhiji, Mandela, who were having moral influence on society. Do you think in future, in area of artificial intelligence and in data analytics and all that, there will be this type of people will be redundant or less influential?
I hope there will be such people and that they will be very influential. Because as I kept saying during this conversation, technology doesn't have all the answers. Technology doesn't tell us what to do with it. We still need ethics, we still need moral guidance, actually we need more than ever before. Technology makes us more powerful, and therefore we have more power to do both good things and bad things. And we need clearer guidance about how to use the new technologies. So I certainly hope that we will have more such figures also in the 21st century.
We have one final question.
Hello, I'm Kenneth from the Hindu newspaper. To say that your books have been successful will be a gross understatement. It has been endorsed by Zuckerberg, Obama, Bill Gates. Some people have called it, called you the guru of liberal elites. So what do you think has been the impact of your books in the past few years? Do you think it can be, books like yours can be used as political leverage to create actual change?
Well, my books are not about the immediate politics of this or that country. I'm not a politician, I have no skill for politics, and I can't give like particular political advice to a politician or a government how to be elected or how to do this policy or that policy. What I try to do is influence the macro agenda of humanity and of the various nations. Because what I see as a scholar, as a scientist, that in too many countries, the political debate is focused almost exclusively on the immediate local issues and ignores the big common challenges of humankind, which will impact everybody. So like I saw the 2016 election campaign in the US, and there was a lot of talk by both Trump and Clinton about immigration, about terrorism, about the state of the US economy, but almost nobody talked about artificial intelligence, about bioengineering, about the future of humanity. Even when they talked about the job market. So Trump scared voters that the Mexicans will take your jobs, but he never told people that the robots will take their jobs, which is a much bigger problem. And you know, people can say, oh, but this is for the far future. It's not for the far future. It's a matter of, say, 15, 20, 30 years. And it's an immediate concern because it's a concern of what you teach kids today in school. Schools today are shaped by what people think the job market would look like in 30 years. And nobody knows how the job market would look like in 30 years. So we don't have time. We need to figure out what to teach kids today in 2018 that will prepare them for the world of artificial intelligence and bioengineering and climate change and all that. So this is how I try to influence the political discussion in different countries in the world. Regarding the idea of becoming a guru, I'm very apprehensive of that. The main difficulty with anybody becoming a guru in any field is that once you become a guru, so two things happen. First of all, you start believing what people tell about you, and it inflates your ego and makes you crazy. And even worse, the people who are following you, they stop thinking. Because they say, oh, we have a guru, so whenever we have a difficult question, we just need to go to the guru and he will tell us what to do. And they stop thinking. And even if the guru tells them the wrong answer, they just accept it. So I hope very much that people don't turn me into a guru. And all my books, I see them more as books of questions than as book of answers. That I raise questions and I try to answer them, but maybe I don't have the right answer. But I hope that people will at least agree on the questions. Like I raised the question of what will AI do to humanity. So I have my theories, and some people may not accept that's very good. But at least I want everybody to start talking about these issues. You don't agree with what I think about AI, very good. What is your opinion? What is your alternative vision? What is your alternative answer? So this is my main hope, that people, whether they agree on the answers or not, doesn't matter, that they take the questions, and that these questions shape the political discussion in the world.
So, the next book, How Not to Be a Guru. Is that it? So, on behalf of all of us and all the journalists in Mumbai, thank you very much for this very absorbing discussion, and especially for rearranging the facts for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.